Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, paralyzed by fear, because you felt someone watching you? Did you know that many people can't shake that feeling because the one lurking in the shadows won't let them wake up again? And what if every whisper in the dark isn't just a sound, but a warning? Today, you'll hear stories that will make your blood run cold. Each one will make you wonder, what if these horrors are real? And what if the next victim is you? Brace yourself as we delve into the deepest fears from which there is no escape.
Detective Evelyn lived in a small provincial town where life moved at a measured pace. Each morning began with the gentle hum of routine as she prepared her coffee and skimmed through the local newspaper. The familiar sights of her neighborhood brought a sense of comfort. The quaint houses stood shoulder to shoulder, their pastel colors muted by the morning light. Children rode bicycles down the quiet streets, while elderly residents tended to their gardens, exchanging polite nods and smiles. Evelyn's days were filled with the predictable ebb and flow of small-town life. She would often walk to the police station, the wooden floors creaking beneath her feet as she entered the office. Her colleagues greeted her with a sense of camaraderie, sharing stories that seemed to blend into the background of everyday occurrences. The town's annual events filled the calendar, from bake sales to community picnics, as the residents took pride in their close-knit relationships. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, something stirred in the air. An unspoken tension lingered among the townsfolk. Conversations would halt abruptly when she approached, eyes flickering with uncertainty. Whispers of a curse haunted the conversations, spoken in hushed tones at the local diner. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures in the woods at dusk, while others shared tales of dreams that felt too real. Evelyn noticed the subtle changes in behavior around her. Neighbors exchanged worried glances, and children played closer to their homes. The vibrant chatter that usually filled the town square had dimmed, replaced by an unsettling quiet that seeped into her bones. It was as if the town itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Unbeknownst to her, this undercurrent of unease would soon lead her down a path she never anticipated. Evelyn received the call just as she was finishing her morning coffee. A body had been discovered in the woods just outside town. The words sent a chill down her spine. It was not the first death she had encountered, but something in the officer's voice hinted that this was different. As she drove to the scene, the familiar landscape blurred past her. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, but Evelyn felt an unsettling heaviness settle over her. Upon arrival, a small crowd of curious onlookers gathered at the edge of the forest, their expressions a mix of horror and fascination. The crime scene was cordoned off with yellow tape that danced slightly in the breeze. Evelyn stepped under the tape, her senses heightened. The air was thick with an earthy smell, mingling with something that felt distinctly wrong. The body lay sprawled on the ground, its position unnatural and contorted. Evelyn knelt beside it, her heart racing. The victim was a local man, known to her merely as a quiet presence in the town. Yet it was not the identity that unsettled her, but the peculiar circumstances surrounding the death. His skin had an unusual pallor, almost as if it had been drained of color. Dark, mottled bruises crisscrossed his arms and neck, forming shapes that resembled claw marks. As she examined the scene, an inexplicable chill crept up her spine. Nearby, a cluster of trees stood still, their branches swaying slightly as if whispering secrets. Evelyn felt as if unseen eyes were watching her. She turned to the crowd, noticing their hushed murmurs and wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They spoke of curses and shadows, of a darkness that had returned to haunt them. Evelyn's instincts kicked in. This was no ordinary death. The oddities of the scene were already weaving a narrative in her mind. She sensed a connection to the whispers she had heard around town. The unease that had settled over her days before now morphed into a growing dread. Something was amiss, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Evelyn felt an urgent need to peel back the layers of the town's history. The strange death was only the beginning. The whispers of a long-forgotten incident tugged at her mind. She began to seek out old records and faded newspaper clippings tucked away in the archives of the local library. The more she read, the more she discovered the story of a group of people who had vanished decades ago. Their disappearance was shrouded in mystery and had left a scar on the town's collective memory. Rumors began to surface. The townsfolk spoke of a curse linked to the vanished group. Some claimed that those who dared to speak their names would face dire consequences. Others recounted chilling tales of shadows flitting at the edges of their vision and of voices echoing through the woods at night. The stories grew darker with each retelling, feeding a growing sense of dread that enveloped Evelyn like a fog. As she delved deeper into her investigation, Evelyn's thoughts became haunted by the faces of the missing. She imagined their lives and the connections they had to the town. What had happened to them? With each piece of information, the burden of the mystery weighed heavier on her mind. The pressure swelled within her, twisting her stomach into knots. She felt as if she were crossing a threshold into a realm best left undisturbed. Her dreams transformed into restless nights filled with visions of the past. Flickering images of the vanished people danced before her eyes, their expressions twisted in fear. The curse seemed to seep into her very being, gnawing at her sense of reality. Evelyn began to question her own sanity. Was she merely uncovering the truth, or awakening something far more sinister? The line between the living and the dead blurred, and she wondered if her pursuit of answers would come at an unbearable cost. As Evelyn continued her investigation, whispers of witnesses began to seep into her consciousness. Local residents emerged from the shadows, eager to share their chilling encounters. They spoke of moments when the veil between life and death seemed to thin. One woman, her voice trembling, described a night when she had wandered too far into the woods. She recounted how a figure appeared from the darkness, its face a grotesque mask of agony. The woman fled, her heart pounding in her chest, yet the memory lingered like a specter haunting her thoughts. Another witness, a young man who had been fishing by the river, spoke of seeing a group of shadowy figures emerging from the water. Their ethereal forms twisted and elongated, as if they were caught between worlds. He described the sensation of overwhelming dread that washed over him, paralyzing his limbs. In that moment, he felt a deep connection to the missing people, a sadness that clawed at his soul. He never returned to that spot, the memory forever etched in his mind. With each testimony, Evelyn's unease deepened. The tales were laden with fear, each account painting a darker picture of the town's history. The witnesses spoke of eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light and whispers that echoed through the trees, beckoning them closer to the abyss. The townsfolk's faces were pale, their eyes wide with disbelief, yet a shared understanding lingered in the air. They were all connected by the same haunting specter of the past. Evelyn felt the weight of their stories pressing down on her. The fear was palpable, seeping into her bones. The town was gripped by a collective terror, each witness adding another layer to the unfolding nightmare. Shadows loomed larger, darkening the corners of her mind. She found herself questioning what lay beyond the threshold of death. Were these entities the souls of the missing, or something far more sinister? The answers eluded her, just out of reach, and the tension in the air thickened with every passing moment. As the days unfolded, the atmosphere in the town shifted dramatically. The initial shock of the bizarre death had morphed into a palpable fear that gripped every resident. Whispers turned to screams as the entities began to prey on the living. It started with strange occurrences, a flickering light here, a cold draft there. Then came the shadows, creeping through homes at night, leaving an unsettling chill in their wake. Evelyn's nights were plagued by visions. She would awaken to find herself paralyzed, eyes wide open, yet unable to move as grotesque figures loomed over her. The first night she felt fingers brush against her neck, icy and thin. She screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. Her sanity began to unravel, and she found solace in the idea that perhaps she was not alone in her terror. The townsfolk began to fracture under the weight of their fear. Neighbors who once shared coffee now avoided each other's gazes. Children stopped playing outside, retreating into the safety of their homes. Panic spread like wildfire. Reports came in of missing pets, and soon people began to disappear. Each report sent shivers down Evelyn's spine, and she felt a deep sense of urgency to uncover the truth. Yet each step she took drew her deeper into the darkness. Unexpected twists left her reeling. A town elder, once dismissive of the curse, confessed to having witnessed the entities himself. He described them as reflections of the lost, twisted, and tormented. The revelation ignited a firestorm of fear and chaos, leading to accusations of witchcraft and dark rituals. In a shocking turn, Evelyn discovered that some of the missing had been seen in the woods, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. They returned to the town only to vanish again, leaving a trail of despair. The psychological toll began to manifest in violent outbursts. Friends turned against each other, and the air thickened with mistrust. Evelyn felt the weight of the town's collective grief and terror pressing down on her. The line between the living and the dead blurred, and she could no longer tell where her investigation ended and her nightmares began. Each day was a battle against the encroaching darkness, and she knew that the stakes were rising. The question loomed over her: would she uncover the truth before it consumed her and the town she had sworn to protect? As Evelyn pieced together the fragments of the town's dark history, a chilling realization began to take shape in her mind. The curse that haunted the residents was not merely a tale spun from fear. It was a manifestation of the pain and suffering of those who had vanished decades ago. Each bizarre death, each terrified witness, was a link in a chain that bound the living to the dead. The missing had become trapped in a liminal space, their souls twisted by the anguish of their unresolved fates. Evelyn uncovered a pattern in the deaths, each victim connected to the original group that had disappeared. It became clear that the curse was a result of their unfulfilled desires and the town's collective negligence. The townsfolk had buried the past, yet the past refused to remain silent. The shadows that haunted them were echoes of their own guilt and fear, manifesting as horrific entities that preyed on the living. Desperation surged within Evelyn as she grasped the enormity of her task. To confront the horrors that had emerged, she needed to sever the connection between the two worlds. A sense of urgency gripped her as she felt the clock ticking. Each day that passed brought new terror, new victims, and the whispers grew louder. The townsfolk grew restless, their fear morphing into madness. Evelyn's heart raced as she contemplated the sacrifices that must be made. To free the restless souls, she would need to confront the darkness head-on, to face the twisted reflections of the missing. She began to gather the townsfolk, urging them to reveal their own connections to the vanished. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became they were all tied to the curse. With each revelation, the stakes escalated. The shadows grew bolder, the manifestations more disturbing. Evelyn could feel the weight of their despair pressing down on her. As the boundary between the living and the dead began to collapse, she steeled herself for the confrontation that lay ahead. The final act loomed on the horizon, and with it, the promise of salvation or complete annihilation. Evelyn stood at the edge of the woods, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with dread as she prepared for the confrontation. She had gathered the townsfolk, their faces pale and drawn, each one haunted by the specters of their past. They formed a circle around her, their breaths shallow, their eyes wide with fear. Evelyn knew the stakes were higher than ever. The horrific entities would not relent without a fight. As she stepped deeper into the forest, the shadows twisted and writhed, whispering in voices that chilled her to the bone. The ground felt alive beneath her feet, pulsing with a dark energy that threatened to consume her. With each step, she felt the weight of the missing souls pressing against her, their anguish echoing in her mind. She could almost see them twisted forms, eyes glowing with a hunger that sent shivers down her spine. Evelyn reached for the talisman she had obtained from an old town elder, a relic said to possess the power to sever the connection between worlds. Her fingers trembled as she held it aloft, the dim light illuminating her determined gaze. She began to chant the incantation, her voice rising above the cacophony of whispers that surrounded her. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows recoiled, their grotesque faces contorting in rage. Suddenly, the entities surged forward, their forms shifting and pulsating with an otherworldly light. Evelyn felt their cold breath on her neck, a reminder of the horrors she faced. They reached for her, clawed hands outstretched, yearning to drag her into their nightmarish realm. The townsfolk gasped, clutching each other as the darkness threatened to engulf them all. Evelyn's heart raced as she pushed through the fear, channeling every ounce of strength within her. The chant grew louder, more powerful. She could feel the talisman vibrating in her hand, resonating with the energy of the entities. But the price of this confrontation was steep. She could feel the life force being drained from her, the sacrifice required to sever the connection. In a moment of clarity, she understood what must be done. With a final burst of determination, she invoked the names of the missing, calling them back from the abyss. The shadows shrieked, a cacophony of pain and anger echoing through the trees. Evelyn felt the pain of their longing, their desire for release. It tore at her soul, and she knew that to save them, she must be willing to pay the ultimate price. The talisman erupted in a blinding light, illuminating the forest as the entities writhed in agony. Evelyn felt herself being pulled into their world, the darkness clawing at her mind. But she stood firm, her voice unwavering. The final words of the incantation spilled from her lips, echoing through the woods, resonating with the very fabric of reality. With a deafening roar, the shadows imploded, the connection finally severed. Evelyn collapsed to the ground, the weight of her sacrifice crashing over her like a tidal wave. Silence enveloped the forest, a stillness that felt both liberating and devastating. She had confronted the horrific entities and paid a heavy toll, but in that moment, the veil between the living and the dead had been lifted. In the days that followed the confrontation, the town began to piece itself back together. The shadows that had haunted their nights receded, replaced by a fragile sense of relief. Evelyn emerged from the ordeal forever changed, her spirit burdened by the memories of the lives lost and the price paid to restore peace. The townsfolk, once gripped by fear, began to reclaim their lives. Children ventured outside again, laughter echoing through the streets as they played beneath the sun. Yet beneath the surface of this newfound normalcy lay an unsettling quiet. The townsfolk spoke of the events in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the woods as if expecting the darkness to return. Rumors persisted of flickering lights seen deep within the trees, of whispers that echoed on the wind. Evelyn herself felt an inexplicable heaviness in her chest, a reminder of the connection she had severed but could not entirely forget. One evening, as she walked the familiar path home, Evelyn caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, watching her with hollow eyes. Her heart raced, and she hesitated, a chill creeping down her spine. The figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows, leaving her questioning her sanity. Had she truly severed the connection, or had she merely pushed it into hiding? As the days turned into weeks, Evelyn's dreams became increasingly restless. She would awaken in a cold sweat, the faces of the missing flashing before her eyes, their silent pleas resonating in her mind. It was then she realized that the curse, while temporarily quelled, had not been entirely vanquished. The darkness may have retreated, but it lingered just beyond the veil, waiting for the right moment to return. Evelyn stood at the threshold of her home one night, the air thick with an unshakable tension. She could feel the weight of the town's history pressing down on her, a reminder that the horrors of the past were never truly gone. In the silence that enveloped her, she understood with a sinking feeling that the battle she had fought was but a prelude to a deeper struggle. The shadows had receded, but they would return, drawn by the whispers of the dead and the secrets of the living that still lay buried in the heart of her small provincial town.